It still feels weird, you know? Standing here. This whole farm, it's mine now. Uncle Jacob, he never had kids, and I guess I was the closest thing. We weren't super close, visited maybe twice a year for holidays when I was a kid, but he always sent a card for my birthday, slipped a 20 in it. He was quiet. Kept to himself out here in the middle of nowhere. When the lawyer called, said Jacob had passed and left the entire property to me, I was floored. Heart attack, they said. Found him out by the barn. Sad, sure, but also, a whole farm? It felt like winning some bizarre lottery I didn't even enter. So here I am. Been here about a week. It's rustic. That's the polite way to put it. The farmhouse is old, smells like dust and something vaguely woodsy, maybe a hint of old pipe tobacco. Needs work. A lot of work. But the land itself is pretty stunning. Rolling hills, dense patches of woods bordering the property, a little creek cutting through the back pasture. It's peaceful. Or it was, the first couple of days. The weirdness started subtly. Like background noise you don't notice until it stops, except this was the opposite. It started with noise, or rather, the lack of it. Usually, farms are loud, right? Chickens clucking, cows mooing, the occasional bleat from a sheep. Jacob kept a mix. Chickens, a half-dozen dairy cows, about 20 sheep, and one perpetually grumpy-looking goat named General Tso. Don't ask. First few days, it was normal. A rural symphony. Then, maybe day 3 or 4, I noticed the silences. Not just quiet, but dead quiet. Like someone hit a mute button on the whole valley. I'd be walking from the house to the barn, and suddenly, nothing. No birdsong from the woods, no buzzing insects, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The animals would just stand there. Frozen. Staring. Not necessarily at me, just staring. Off into the distance, usually towards the woods at the edge of the property. Then, just as suddenly, the sound would flick back on. Chickens would erupt in a cacophony, a cow would moo like nothing happened. It was jarring. Unsettling. At first, I brushed it off. City kid adjusting to country quiet, right? Maybe animals just do that sometimes. But it kept happening. And it wasn't just the silence. Their movements started getting synchronized. One morning, I came out to feed the chickens. Usually, they rushed the coop door like a feathery mob. This time, they were all standing in the run, perfectly still, facing the exact same direction, east, towards the sunrise, but more specifically, towards that dense patch of woods on the eastern boundary. Every single one. Like little white and brown statues. It was creepy. I rattled the feed bucket, and they snapped out of it, swarming me like usual, but the image stuck with me. Then there were the cows. Normally pretty placid, just chewing cud, swishing tails. But twice now, I've seen them gathered in the middle of the pasture, not grazing, just standing shoulder to shoulder in a near-perfect circle, facing inwards. Like they were having a meeting. A silent, unnerving meeting. The moment they spotted me approaching, the circle would break, and they'd amble off, pretending to graze, but I swear they looked guilty? Embarrassed? Can a cow look embarrassed? I don't know, but that's the vibe I got. And the sheep? They're maybe the weirdest. They've started bleating at night. Not the usual random sounds, but rhythmic. A low, guttural bleat, then a pause, then another. Over and over, for hours sometimes. It echoes across the fields, and it doesn't sound right. It sounds strained, almost pained, but also deliberate. Like a code. Or a chant. Lying in that old farmhouse bed, listening to that sound drift through the window, it makes my skin crawl. Yesterday, I found the first note. Tucked inside the ledger book in Uncle Jacob's dusty office. It wasn't farm accounts. It was a single sheet of yellowed paper, his familiar spiky handwriting on it. It just said, Rule number 1, always latch the barn door from the outside at sundown. Use the iron bolt, not just the wooden latch. Ensure General Tso is inside first. His disposition deters the curious. Rule number 2, never approach the woods on the eastern boundary after dusk. Observe, do not engage. Rule number 3. If the silences last longer than 5 minutes, check the animals. If they are facing the woods, lock yourself indoors until sunrise. Do not respond to any knocking unless it's 3 sharp raps, pause, then 2 more. I read it maybe 10 times. Iron bolt? Deter the curious? Observe, do not engage? What was I supposed to be observing? And the knocking pattern? It sounded like something out of a spy movie, not farm maintenance. General Tso, the grumpy goat, as some kind of guard dog? It made no sense. But it was definitely Jacob's handwriting. I remembered it clearly from those birthday cards. I tried to laugh it off. Old farmer eccentricity, maybe? Paranoia from living alone too long? But the part about the silences, the animals facing the woods, that hit a little too close to home after the chicken incident. I went out to the barn. Sure enough, there was the regular wooden latch, easy to flip. And next to it, drilled into the heavy timber frame, was a massive, rusty iron bolt that looked like it belonged on a castle dungeon. It slid into a thick iron bracket on the door itself. It hadn't been used in a long time. It screeched like a banshee when I tested it. Why install something like that? And why specify using it? I also found General Tso. He was, as usual, chewing on something he shouldn't be, in this case, the corner of a feed sack. He glared at me with those weird rectangular pupils goats have. He always looks vaguely judgmental. Could this perpetually unimpressed goat really deter whatever Jacob thought was curious? It seemed ridiculous. Later that afternoon, I met Martha. She's the nearest neighbor, though nearest relative out here. Her place is maybe half a mile down the dirt road, barely visible through the trees. She drove up in an ancient pickup truck, bringing a welcome casserole, bless her heart. She's probably in her late 60s, maybe early 70s, wiry, with sharp eyes that seemed to take everything in. "Heard you were settling in," she said, handing me the dish. Her voice was friendly, but had a careful sort of quality to it. Jacob was a good man. Quiet. Kept things running his own way. "Thanks, Martha, that's really nice of you," I said, trying to sound appreciative and not completely freaked out by my own farm. "Yeah, it's an adjustment. It always is out here." She nodded, her eyes scanning the tree line, lingering for just a second on that eastern patch of woods. "Place has its rhythms. Takes getting used to." I hesitated, then decided to test the waters. "Things seem a little quiet sometimes?" Martha's smile tightened, just a fraction. "Oh? How do you mean?" "Just, sometimes everything stops. The animals, the birds. Everything goes dead silent." She looked back at me, her gaze sharp. "Jacob mention anything about that?" No. Not really. I didn't feel like mentioning the creepy note just yet. "Well," she said, turning back to her truck. "Some old places, they got their quirks. Listen to the land, boy. And listen to what Jacob told you. He knew this place better than anyone." She paused, hand on the truck door. "Especially about locking up tight after sundown. Good fences make good neighbors, and strong bolts keep out, well, whatever needs keeping out." She gave me another tight smile and drove off, leaving me standing there with a lukewarm casserole and a growing sense of dread. Whatever needs keeping out? What did that mean? And how did she know about the bolt? Did Jacob tell her? Or is it common knowledge around here that something needs keeping out of Jacob's farm? The way she looked at the woods, it wasn't just casual observation. It was wary. That night, I made sure General Tso was in the barn. He seemed particularly agitated, head-butting the wall softly, making low grumbling noises. Then, as the sun dipped below the hills, painting the sky orange and purple, I slid that heavy iron bolt across the barn door. It groaned in protest, the sound echoing in the sudden evening quiet. It felt overly dramatic, securing a barn full of livestock like it was Fort Knox. But Martha's words, Jacob's note, they echoed louder than the bolt. Standing there in the twilight, with the woods darkening into an impenetrable wall of black, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't just locking the animals in. I was locking something else out. The silence fell again, heavy and expectant. I waited, listening. Nothing. Not even the sheep started their weird chanting yet. I scanned the fields. The cows were vague shapes in the gloom, still. The chickens were presumably roosting. It felt too still. I backed away towards the farmhouse, checking over my shoulder every few steps. The rational part of my brain was screaming that I was being an idiot, spooked by shadows and old notes. But another part, a colder, more primal part, whispered that the rules were there for a reason. And I really didn't want to find out what happened if I broke them. I locked the farmhouse door, checked the windows, and settled in for a long, quiet night, wondering what exactly I'd inherited along with this land. The casserole was good, at least. Small comfort. The next few days were a tense routine. Wake up, check the animals, who seemed normal enough in the daylight, mostly, do some basic chores, try to ignore the unnerving silences that still descended like clockwork, usually mid-morning and late afternoon. I always made sure to be near the house or the barn when they happened. I kept finding more of Jacob's notes, tucked away in odd places. One was taped under the lid of the main breaker box in the basement. Rule number 4, power fluctuations are normal, especially during high humidity or electrical storms. Do not investigate flickering lights outside the immediate farmhouse perimeter after 10 p.m. What you might see is not for you. Rule number 5, avoid patterns. Vary your daily routes around the property. Do not establish predictable habits. They learn. They learn? What learns? Power fluctuations? We haven't had a storm, but last night the lights in the kitchen did flicker for a good minute. I'd chalked it up to old wiring. Now? Less sure. And varying my routes? How paranoid was Uncle Jacob? Or how necessary was it? I started deliberately taking different paths to the chicken coop, the pasture, the creek. It felt stupid, like I was playing spy games with invisible watchers, but the notes were getting under my skin. The sheep chanting started earlier last night. Around 9 p.m. That low, rhythmic bleating. Ba pause. Ba pause. It's hypnotic in the worst way. I tried timing it. It wasn't perfectly regular, but close. Like a slow, broken heartbeat echoing from the sheep pen. General Tso, locked in the barn, sometimes answered with a series of frustrated snorts and bangs against the door, which only added to the general creepiness. Then came the incident with the cows. It was mid-afternoon, the sun high and bright. No silence this time, just wrongness. I was heading back from checking a fence line near the western edge of the property, furthest from the creepy eastern woods. As I came over a small rise, I saw the 6 dairy cows. They weren't in a circle this time. They were lined up. A perfectly straight, single-file line, facing directly towards the farmhouse. Stock still. Heads level, eyes fixed on the house. It looked like a picture from a geometry textbook, utterly unnatural for living creatures. My breath caught. It was so deliberate, so staged. I froze, watching them. They didn't twitch. Didn't swish their tails. Just stood there, a silent, milky blockade aimed at my home. I felt a surge of anger mixed with fear. "Hey!" I yelled, waving my arms. "Get! Go on!" Nothing. No reaction. It was like yelling at statues. I started walking towards them, my boots crunching on the dry grass. As I got closer, maybe 50 yards away, the lead cow, Buttercup, Jacob, had ear tags with names, surprisingly sentimental, slowly, deliberately, turned her head. Just her head. Her body remained perfectly aligned with the others. She looked right at me. Her eyes, usually, cow eyes are placid, maybe a little dumb-looking. These eyes looked old and aware. There was an intelligence there that didn't belong in a cow's head. It wasn't hostile, not exactly. It was more like appraisal, calculation. My steps faltered. The other 5 cows remained rigidly facing the house. Only Buttercup watched me. The air felt thick. The normal farm sounds, distant birds, the hum of insects, seemed muffled, distant. It was just me, and the 6 cows lined up like a bizarre honor guard, with the lead one staring me down. I took another hesitant step. Buttercup let out a low, long moo. It wasn't a normal sound. It was deeper, resonant, almost like a warning growl. It vibrated in my chest. Okay, nope. Absolutely nope. I slowly backed away, never taking my eyes off Buttercup. She watched me until I crested the rise again. Then, deliberately, she turned her head back to face the farmhouse, rejoining the silent vigil. I didn't run, but I walked back to the house fast, my heart pounding. What the hell was that? Animals don't do that. They don't line up like soldiers. They don't look at you with ancient intelligence in their eyes. Shaken, I decided I needed to talk to someone official. Maybe animal control? The police? It sounded crazy, reporting my cows for acting weird, but I felt like I was losing my grip. I called the county sheriff's office. Non-emergency line, obviously. A bored-sounding dispatcher transferred me to Deputy Miller. He sounded young, maybe mid-20s, and thoroughly unimpressed with my stammered explanation about silent sheep and synchronized cows. So, Mr. Davis. Alex Davis. Jacob Thorne was my uncle. Right, Thorne's place. Look, Mr. Davis, animals act funny sometimes. Especially if there's a change in routine, new person around. Stress, you know? Deputy, this isn't just funny. They lined up. Perfectly straight line. Staring at my house. One of them looked right at me like it knew my social security number. And the sheep chanting at night. There was a sigh on the other end. Chanting sheep, huh? Okay. Look, I can swing by tomorrow, take a look around, but honestly, it sounds like you're just not used to farm life. Old Jacob, he was a bit eccentric, maybe some of that rubbed off on the place. Eccentric? He left notes. Rules. About iron bolts, and not going near the woods, and things learning. Notes? Miller sounded slightly more interested now, but still skeptical. Well, like I said, eccentric. Probably just talking about coyotes or foxes getting after the chickens. Standard stuff. Tell you what, I'll be out there around 10 a.m. tomorrow. Try and get some sleep, Mr. Davis. Maybe stay off the internet, stop reading creepy stories. He chuckled lightly. Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one living with chanting sheep and cows that looked like they were plotting world domination. Hanging up, I felt more isolated than ever. Miller thought I was nuts. Maybe I was. But the image of Buttercup's knowing eyes, the rigid line of cows, that felt chillingly real. That night, I found another note. This one was slipped inside an old farmer's almanac on the bedside table. Rule number 6. Report any unusual animal formations or prolonged silences, over 15 minutes, via coded message. Instructions attached. Do not use standard phone lines for specific details. Assume observation. Rule number 7. Under no coded message? Containment? Observation? This was escalating way beyond eccentric. Attached was a smaller, sealed envelope. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a complex substitution cipher key and a shortwave radio frequency number, along with the call sign, Shepherd. Below that, a single contact number labeled emergency only, Proctor. Proctor? Who the hell was Proctor? Blood spilled on the eastern pasture. Containment is priority. My blood ran cold. This wasn't about keeping foxes out. This was something else entirely. Something Jacob was actively managing, containing. And now, it was my problem. The sheep started bleating outside, their rhythmic calls seeming louder, more insistent tonight. Ba pause. Ba pause. I looked out the window. The moon was nearly full, casting long, eerie shadows across the fields. I couldn't see the sheep pen clearly from here, but I could feel their presence. And I could definitely feel the oppressive weight of the eastern woods, a solid black mass under the moonlight. What was in there? What was Jacob trying to contain? And what happened if containment failed? Deputy Miller's visit tomorrow suddenly felt woefully inadequate. I wasn't just a city kid spooked by farm life. I was in charge of something dangerous, and I had absolutely no idea what I was doing. Deputy Miller arrived right on time, 10 a.m. sharp. His cruiser crunched up the gravel driveway, kicking up dust. He got out, adjusting his belt, taking in the scene with a practiced air of authority mixed with slight boredom. He looked barely older than me, honestly. Clean-cut, short brown hair, eyes that scanned the property but didn't seem to really see the simmering wrongness I felt everywhere. "Mr. Davis," he said, offering a brief nod. "Deputy Miller. So, this is the place." "Yeah. Thanks for coming out, Deputy." "No problem. Part of the job. Now, show me these, misbehaving animals." He sounded like he was humoring a kid complaining about monsters under the bed. We walked towards the pasture first. The cows were just being cows, grazing peacefully, swishing tails, occasionally mooing. No straight lines, no intense staring. They looked completely, disappointingly normal. Buttercup glanced up as we approached the fence, chewed thoughtfully for a moment, then went back to pulling up grass. There was no flicker of that unnerving intelligence I had seen yesterday. "See?" Miller said, leaning on the fence rail. "Just cows, Mr. Davis. Probably spooked by a coyote yesterday, or maybe just feeling frisky. Happens." I felt my frustration rising. It wasn't like this yesterday. They were lined up. Right here. Facing the house. Miller squinted towards the house, then back at the cows. "Okay. Well, they're not doing it now. How about the chickens?" We went over to the coop. The chickens were scratching and clucking, chasing bugs, being perfectly ordinary chickens. Nose synchronized, staring towards the eastern woods. "Normal chickens too," Miller stated, hands on his hips. "Look, I get it. Moving to a new place, especially a remote one like this, after your uncle passed, it can play tricks on your mind. Grief, stress, isolation. It's not in my mind," I insisted, trying to keep my voice level. "And what about the sheep? The bleating at night?" "Sheep bleat, Mr. Davis. It's what they do. Not like this. It's rhythmic. All night sometimes." Miller sighed. "Farm noises carry at night. Maybe you're just noticing it more because it's quiet out here. Tell you what, let's check the sheep pen." We walked over. The sheep were milling around, some grazing, some lying down. Again, disappointingly normal. Except, as we stood there, one sheep, then another, lifted its head and looked towards the eastern woods. Then another. Within about 30 seconds, all 20 sheep were standing still, facing the woods. Not in a line, just facing. Silent. "See?" I whispered, pointing. "They're doing it now." Miller watched them for a long moment. He frowned slightly. "Huh. That is kinda weird, I guess. Maybe something spooked them over that way. A dog? Bear? It happens even when there's nothing there," I said. "And the silences? Have you ever heard it just go completely dead quiet out here?" He shrugged. "It gets quiet, sure. Never noticed dead quiet. Look, Mr. Davis, I see they're looking at the woods. It's unusual. But it's not exactly criminal activity, is it? What do you want me to do? Arrest the sheep for loitering?" He gave a small, forced chuckle. "What about my uncle's notes?" I asked desperately. "The rules? The iron bolt on the barn? The warnings about the woods? Your uncle was known for being particular," Miller said carefully. "Lived alone a long time. People get set in their ways, develop little rituals. Doesn't mean there's anything dangerous going on. Probably just overly cautious about predators or trespassers." He clearly wasn't buying it. Or didn't want to. He took a cursory look around the barn, noted the big iron bolt without much comment, glanced towards the dark tree line of the eastern woods, and then seemed ready to wrap things up. "All right, Mr. Davis. Here's my card." He handed me one. "If anything concrete happens, you see trespassers, actual damage, an animal gets hurt by something other than natural causes, give me a call." Otherwise, maybe try getting out a bit. Meet some folks? Don't let the quiet get to you. He got back in his cruiser, gave a curt wave, and drove off, leaving me standing there feeling foolish and increasingly scared. He hadn't seen the lined-up cows. The chickens had behaved. The sheep staring was just kinda weird. He thought I was just a stressed city kid. Maybe he was right? But Jacob's notes. They learn. Containment is priority. That wasn't just about foxes. That evening, the silence fell hard. It was just before sundown. I was walking back from the creek, deliberately taking a different path as rule number 5 dictated. One moment, birds were singing their evening songs, insects were buzzing. The next? Absolute, profound silence. Deeper than before. The air felt heavy, like a physical weight pressing down. My ears strained, searching for any sound, finding none. I looked around wildly. The trees stood unnaturally still. No wind rustled their leaves. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. I remembered rule number 3. If the silences last longer than 5 minutes, check the animals. If they are facing the woods, lock yourself indoors until sunrise. I glanced at my watch. The silence had already lasted maybe 30 seconds. It felt like an eternity. I started walking quickly towards the pastures, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sheep were already facing the woods. Frozen. Like woolly statues paying homage to the dark trees. My blood ran cold. I broke into a jog, heading for the cow pasture. Same thing. All 6 cows, standing stock still, heads up, staring intently at the eastern woods. Even General Tso, who I hadn't managed to herd into the barn yet, was standing near the fence, utterly motionless, gaze fixed on the trees. My watch showed 2 minutes had passed. The silence was absolute, oppressive. Panic started to claw at my throat. I sprinted towards the barn, grabbed the goat's rope. He didn't even flinch, just kept staring, and practically dragged him inside. He started bleating in protest once the door was shut, the sound jarring in the dead quiet. I slammed the heavy barn door, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the massive iron bolt. It slid home with a deafening screech that echoed unnaturally in the stillness. Rule number 3. Lock yourself indoors until sunrise. I ran for the farmhouse, glancing back at the fields. The cows and sheep hadn't moved. Silent sentinels guarding, or watching. I burst through the farmhouse door, slamming and locking it behind me. Checked the windows again. All locked. My breathing was ragged. How long had the silence lasted? I checked my watch. 4 minutes and 40 seconds. Close. Too close. Then, just as the 5-minute mark hit, the sound snapped back on. Crickets started chirping tentatively. A distant owl hooted. The wind rustled the leaves outside the window. It was jarring, like surfacing from underwater. But the relief was short-lived. Because right after the normal sounds returned, a new sound started. Knocking. Someone was knocking on the front door. Not the rhythmic sheep bleating. Not the wind. A distinct, deliberate knock. My heart leaped into my throat. Rule number 3 again. Do not respond to any knocking unless it's 3 sharp raps. Pause, then 2 more. The knocking came again. Knock. 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 A steady, insistent rhythm. Not the code. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, dust motes dancing in the last rays of sunlight filtering through the window. Who could be out there? Miller was long gone. Martha hadn't said she was coming back. No cars had come up the drive. Knock. 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 It was louder this time. More demanding. I crept towards the front door, peering through the peephole. There was no one there. Just the porch, the yard, the long shadows stretching towards the now dark woods. But the knocking continued. Knock. 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 It seemed to be coming from the door itself, but also from everywhere. From the walls. From the floorboards. Like the house itself was rapping its knuckles. I backed away, trembling. This wasn't normal. This wasn't stress or isolation. This was real. Whatever Jacob had warned against, whatever the animals were reacting to, it was here. Outside. Maybe inside too. The knocking stopped. Silence descended again, but this time it wasn't the profound, unnatural silence from before. It was just the absence of knocking, leaving a ringing tension in the air. Then, a floorboard creaked upstairs. I wasn't alone in the house. Fear, cold and absolute, seized me. I grabbed the heavy iron poker from the fireplace, the only thing resembling a weapon nearby. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but where? Outside, where the silent animals watched the woods and phantom knocks echoed. Or stay inside, where something was moving upstairs. Another creak. Slower this time. Closer to the staircase. I backed towards the kitchen, my eyes fixed on the darkened stairwell leading to the second floor. My uncle's notes, the animals, the knocking, it all felt like pieces of a terrifying puzzle clicking into place. This farm wasn't just land and livestock. It was a cage. Or maybe bait. Then, from the top of the stairs, obscured by shadow, a voice whispered. It sounded dry, ancient, like rustling leaves. "Shepherd, are you tending the flock?" My blood turned to ice. Shepherd. The call sign from Jacob's coded message instructions. Whatever was upstairs knew about the protocols. It knew about Jacob. And now, it knew about me. The poker felt pitifully inadequate in my hands. The silence stretched, broken only by my own frantic heartbeat. A shadow shifted at the top of the stairs, detaching itself from the deeper darkness. It was tall, unnaturally thin, its limbs seeming too long, jointed at odd angles. It didn't look human. Not even close. It started to descend the stairs, one slow, deliberate step at a time. Each creak of the old wood was like a hammer blow against my sanity. Rule number 2, observe, do not engage. But how could I not engage when it was inside the house with me? The figure reached the bottom of the stairs and paused, still mostly in shadow, only its silhouette visible against the dim light from the living room window. It tilted its head, a gesture that seemed both inquisitive and deeply predatory. "The perimeter is weakening," the voice rasped, drier this time, like sand scouring rock. "The patterns are fraying. Blood calls to blood. Blood calls to blood." Rule number 7. Under no circumstances should blood be spilled on the eastern pasture after dark. Containment is priority. What had Jacob done? What bloodline was involved here? Mine? My mind raced. Coded messages. Shortwave radio. The emergency number for Proctor. Maybe that was the only way. Engaging this thing felt like suicide. I needed help. I needed answers. But first, I needed to get out of this room. The figure took another step towards me, out of the shadows and into the faint moonlight filtering through the window. It was worse up close. Its skin, if you could call it that, looked like tightly stretched, gray parchment over sharp, bony ridges. Its face was a nightmare collage of mismatched features. Too many eyes, clustered and unblinking, and a mouth that split vertically down its face, opening slightly to reveal rows of needle-sharp teeth. It didn't have a nose, just two narrow slits that seemed to inhale the air slowly, tasting it. "Your predecessor understood sacrifice," it hissed, the sound slithering through the air. "He understood the balance. The pact." A pact? Jacob made a pact with this? Was that how he contained it? By sacrificing something? My stomach churned. The figure raised one impossibly long, multi-jointed arm, pointing a finger tipped with a shard of obsidian-like claw towards the eastern woods. The feeders grow restless. The walls thin. "You are insufficient." It started moving towards me again, faster this time, its weird gait unnervingly fluid despite its jerky movements. Terror gave way to pure survival instinct. I hefted the poker. "Stay back!" I yelled, my voice cracking. It let out a chittering sound that might have been laughter. It didn't stop. I swung the poker wildly, aiming for its head. It dodged with impossible speed, the poker hitting the wall with a dull thud. Before I could recover, its long arm lashed out, not with the claw, but with the flat of its hand. It struck my chest with surprising force, sending me stumbling back, gasping for air. I crashed into the kitchen table, sending plates and cutlery scattering. The thing loomed over me, its cluster of eyes fixed on mine. Its vertical mouth opened wider. "The flock needs a new shepherd," it rasped. "Or it needs a new feast." Just as it leaned down, its foul breath washing over me, a sudden, blindingly bright light flooded the kitchen from the back window, accompanied by a deafening roar, like a jet engine starting up right outside. The creature shrieked, a high-pitched, tearing sound that vibrated through my bones, and recoiled, throwing its long arms up to shield its eyes. Through the window, I saw headlights, powerful, focused beams cutting through the darkness. A vehicle door slammed shut. Heavy footsteps crunched on the gravel outside the back door. The creature hissed again, turned, and flowed back towards the stairwell with that same unnatural speed, melting into the shadows upstairs just as the back door burst open. Standing there, silhouetted against the intense light, was a woman. She wore practical, dark clothing, almost tactical gear, and held a strange-looking device that hummed faintly. Her face was stern, etched with lines of experience, her gray eyes sharp and assessing as she swept the room. She wasn't Miller. She wasn't Martha. This was someone new. Character number 5, arriving right in the middle of the nightmare. "Alex Davis?" she asked, her voice calm but commanding, cutting through the lingering tension. The humming device in her hand pulsed slightly. I nodded dumbly, still sprawled on the floor, trying to catch my breath. "Name's Proctor," she said, lowering the device slightly. Her eyes flickered towards the staircase where the creature had vanished. "Looks like your orientation just got accelerated. Grab your uncle's emergency kit. We need to reinforce the boundary. Now." Proctor. The emergency contact from Jacob's note. She was real, and she knew exactly what was happening. The relief was immense, but fleeting, replaced by 1,000 questions. Emergency kit? Reinforce the boundary? What boundary? What was that thing? I managed to ask, scrambling to my feet, my legs shaky. Proctor didn't look away from the staircase. "That was item designation 734 Alpha. The listener. It's not supposed to be able to manifest physically inside a secured dwelling unless the containment field is critically weak. Or unless it's invited." Her eyes flicked to me, sharp and questioning. "You didn't spill any blood recently, did you? Eastern pasture?" I shook my head numbly. "No. Nothing." "Good. Then the field is just failing faster than anticipated since Jacob." She trailed off, her jaw tightening. "His kit. Usually kept in the cellar, false bottom in the old preserves chest. Go. I'll keep watch here." Her tone left no room for argument. This woman radiated competence and an unnerving familiarity with the horrors of this farm. I half stumbled towards the cellar door, my mind reeling. Item designation? Containment field? My uncle wasn't just an eccentric farmer. He was some kind of warden. And Proctor? Was she part of an organization? The one Jacob reported to using coded messages? The cellar was damp and smelled of earth and old potatoes. I found the preserves chest, a heavy wooden box in the corner. Fumbling with the lid, I lifted out dusty jars until I reached the bottom. Sure enough, a section of the wood looked slightly different. I pried at it, and it came loose, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a sturdy metal case, like a large toolbox, secured with combination locks. "Combination is his date of birth, backwards," Proctor yelled down the stairs. Jacob's birthday. I remembered it from the cards. August 15th. So, 5180, wait, year? I didn't know the year. Think. He was older than my dad, maybe born in the 50s. I tried 518055. Click. 518054. Click. 518053. Click. The locks sprang open. Inside wasn't tools. It was equipment. Strange devices made of brass and copper wiring, glass vials filled with shimmering liquids, heavy leather-bound journals filled with Jacob's spiky script, and several laminated cards detailing complex procedures and diagrams. One card was titled, Emergency Boundary Reinforcement Protocol 7B, Fauna Assisted. Fauna Assisted? The animals? Were they part of the containment? Their weird behavior suddenly seemed less random, more purposeful. Like they were reacting to weaknesses in whatever invisible fence held the real horrors back. I grabbed the case, it was heavy, and hurried back upstairs. Proctor was standing exactly where I left her, device held steady, gaze fixed on the upper floor. The house was quiet again, but it felt like a temporary truce. "Okay," she said without looking at me. "Standard Type 3 incursion response. Did you find Protocol 7B? Yeah. It mentions the animals. Correct. The livestock aren't just livestock. They're bioindicators and passive resonators for the primary field. Their synchronized behavior indicates field instability in that vector." She gestured vaguely towards the eastern woods with her chin. "The listener manifesting means we have a potential breach imminent. We need to boost the signal." She took the case, opened it swiftly, and pulled out several items: 4 copper rods topped with intricate glass spheres, a spool of silvery wire, and one of the vials filled with a faintly glowing blue liquid. "Right. We need to place these resonance rods at the 4 cardinal points around the farmhouse perimeter, roughly 50 yards out. Connect them with the wire. Then we activate the core amplifier, this." She patted the device she'd been holding, and introduced the catalyst. She held up the blue vial. "What is that?" I asked, eyeing the glowing liquid nervously. "Stabilizing agent. Synthesized from local resources." She didn't elaborate. "The fauna, the animals, will react. They'll gather near the rods. Their collective biological field helps focus and amplify the containment barrier. It's crude, but it works. Usually. Usually. Not the most comforting word right now. Okay, what do I do? You take 2 rods and the wire. North and west points. I'll take south and east. Place the rod, unspool the wire towards the next point as you go. Move fast. The listener won't stay quiet for long, especially now that it knows the shepherd is unprepared." She gave me a look that was half pity, half appraisal. "Don't engage anything you see or hear. Just place the rods and get back here. Understand?" I nodded, grabbing the heavy copper rods and the wire spool. My hands were still shaking. Bioindicators? Resonance rods? Containment fields? This was insane. It was like stepping into some kind of low-budget sci-fi horror movie, except the monster was real and currently hiding upstairs. "Go!" Proctor commanded. I burst out the back door into the cool night air. The intense lights from Proctor's vehicle, a black, unmarked SUV, I now saw, cut cones of visibility into the darkness. Beyond them, the farm was plunged into shadow and moonlight. The animals were still out there. I could feel their presence, their unnatural stillness. I ran towards the north point, stumbling over uneven ground, the copper rod heavy in my hand. The night air felt charged, expectant. I could hear faint whispers on the wind, sounds that slithered just at the edge of hearing. Were they real, or just my frayed nerves? I found a spot roughly 50 yards out, jammed the rod into the soft earth, attached the silvery wire, and started unspooling it as I ran west. My flashlight beam bounced erratically, illuminating patches of grass, the dark shape of the barn, the fence line. Every shadow seemed to writhe with potential threats. I kept glancing back at the farmhouse. Its windows looked like dark, empty eyes. Was the listener watching from upstairs? I reached the west point, planted the second rod, and turned back towards the house, trailing the wire. As I ran, I saw Proctor's flashlight beam moving near the southern edge of the yard. She was moving quickly, efficiently. Then I heard it. The sheep. They started bleating again. Not the rhythmic chant from before, but a frantic, panicked chorus. High-pitched, terrified sounds. Something was spooking them. Badly. I risked a glance towards the eastern woods as I ran. Did I see movement among the trees? Tall, spindly shapes flitting between the trunks? Or was it just the moonlight playing tricks? Rule number 2, observe, do not engage. I forced myself to look away, focusing on getting back to the relative safety of the farmhouse and Proctor. I reached the back door just as Proctor returned from the east, her face grim. "Wire connected?" she asked breathlessly. "Yeah. The sheep just started freaking out. It knows we're reinforcing," she muttered, already working on the amplifier device, connecting the wire ends to terminals. "Stand back." She twisted a dial on the amplifier. It began to hum louder, vibrating faintly. Then she uncorked the vial of glowing blue liquid. With steady hands, she poured a small amount into a port on the device. The humming intensified, shifting pitch into a high-frequency whine that made my teeth ache. The glass spheres on the rods I'd planted, barely visible in the dark, began to glow with a faint blue light, mirroring the liquid. Almost immediately, the animals reacted. The frantic bleating of the sheep cut off abruptly. The cows, which must have been standing silently nearby, let out a series of low, resonant moos. It wasn't a sound of panic, but of response. A deep, harmonic vibration seemed to fill the air, emanating from the animal. Suddenly, a blood-curdling shriek tore through the night from the upper floor of the farmhouse. It was the listener. A sound of pure agony and rage. The windows on the second floor rattled violently. "Get inside!" Proctor yelled, grabbing my arm and pulling me towards the door. "It's contained for now, but it's angry." We scrambled back into the kitchen, slamming and locking the door just as something heavy slammed against the inside of the house upstairs, shaking the whole structure. Proctor leaned against the door, breathing heavily, her eyes scanning the ceiling. The amplifier outside continued its high-pitched whine, the blue glow from the rods casting an eerie perimeter around the house. The immediate crisis seemed paused, but the implications were overwhelming. My uncle, this farm, the animals, the rules, Proctor, the creature upstairs, it was all connected. And now, somehow, it was my responsibility. The shepherd. Proctor looked at me, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "Welcome to the job, kid," she said, her voice devoid of warmth. "Jacob should have prepared you better. Now, we have a lot to discuss before sunrise. And before item 734 Alpha decides to test the fences again. The farm wasn't a gift. It was a prison. And I was the new warden.